It's the first day of what many hope will be a new era in Albuquerque, the day the city and the Federal Department of Justice start hammering out a plan to implement sweeping changes with the police department. These are changes that could take months, maybe even years. And the feds are expected to install a monitor at APD to make sure these changes are made. The changes needed, well, they are all spelled out in a 46-page report.
We will peel the onion to its core, and we will leave no stone unturned.
That was the promise the Department of Justice made back in 2012 when it announced an official investigation into Albuquerque's police department. Now the DOJ is making good with this, a 46-page letter to Mayor R.J. Berry that takes APD to task.
We found that the Albuquerque Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of violating residents' Fourth Amendment rights by using excessive force during police encounters.
A lot of those violations come from police shootings. Albuquerque's officers shot and killed 20 people from 2009 to 2012, and the DOJ's investigation found a majority of them violated people's constitutional rights, saying the police often shot suspects who posed no threat to officers or anyone else but themselves. The DOJ also finds Albuquerque's police department doesn't police itself, does not properly train officers, and has an aggressive culture from top to bottom, saying this culture is evident in the department's training, permissive policy on weapons, underutilization of its crisis intervention team, overuse of SWAT, and the harsh approaches to ordinary encounters with residents.
I think our letter speaks for itself.
As difficult as the findings in the report are, and there are some difficult findings in the report, and we recognize that, the good news is that this is an achievable goal.
Well, the mayor and the police chief were not at the DOJ news conference yesterday morning, but about an hour later they talked about the scathing report and they tried to answer questions, or at least some of them. Throughout his time in office, a little more than 4 years, Mayor R.J. Berry has consistently said APD does not have a serious problem, something the DOJ report flat out contradicts.
So my question is, who was wrong, you or them?
Well, look, we have a lot more information today than we had yesterday, and in some of the information that we have today, frankly, we couldn't get without the DOJ's involvement.
That question the mayor didn't exactly answer was from our investigative producer, Jeff Proctor. Well, back in 2011, the city hired a law enforcement think tank to look at APD's use of force, but the DOJ says that 9-month study did not do it right. After reading that in the DOJ report, the mayor says he agrees that it did not go far enough. Police Chief Gordon Eden then took the reins in the middle of February of this year, but even as a new chief, he is not off the hook. The DOJ report mentions the chief's comments after the deadly police shooting of James Boyd here in the foothills last month. Chief Eden declared it, quote, justified the day he released that controversial video that ended up going viral. And it was a comment the DOJ says shows more work is needed to change the culture of APD.
After that press conference, those comments were premature and should not have even addressed that question until the investigation had been completed. And that investigation had a thorough analysis by proper legal authority to make that determination.
The chief and his command staff had a meeting yesterday with the DOJ to talk more specifically about the report and changes for APD. The mayor says the city will also look at outside consultants to help implement those changes. Well, that James Boyd case could take a criminal turn to an investigation, but it may be a while before we know about any specific charges. Other cases have been referred to, but so far there's been no announcement of any indictments. However, the DOJ report does point to 6 specific shootings the feds say were not justified. In 5 of the 6 cases highlighted by the Department of Justice, the men APD officers killed did not have any weapons.
I anticipate some indictments, and I anticipate some of these officers being imprisoned for their killings of these young men.
All right, now we do not know if any of those cases have been referred to the FBI for criminal charges. The report also highlights APD's use of force by kicking armbar takedowns and tasing people when it's simply not needed.
We found that officers used other types of less lethal force, especially electronic control weapons or tasers, in an unconstitutional manner.
The DOJ says APD has not provided sufficient training for officers to use these tasers. The Fed cites specific cases, such as a call out in 2009 where a man had doused himself in gasoline. Officers ended up tasing him over and over, setting him on fire. Other cases involve police tasing an elderly man with a cane and tasing a man with the mental capacity of a young child. When it comes to how well the police department tracks and disciplines officers who use excessive force, the Justice investigation says APD's biggest failure is in the department's Internal Affairs Division. That's the division that is supposed to police the police. News 13's David Romero has more on that live from police headquarters downtown. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Matt. Well, the Department of Justice says there's no question that the city has spent a lot of money looking for ways to deal with excessive force. The problem is, and the report says, that because of a breakdown in leadership, APD hasn't made it clear to officers what's expected or backed it up with any kind of real discipline.
Our investigation found a significant number of improper uses of force in our review of over 200 force reports that were generated between 2009 and early 2013.
Now, that's what the feds found, but the Internal Affairs rarely found officers use excessive force. The department often endorses questionable and sometimes unlawful conduct by officers. The report says that makes officers think that it's okay. And it says efforts to deal with use of force controversies got political. Reforms like lapel cameras or equipping officers with tasers served mostly as an image solution, and rank and file officers were not adequately trained in using them. Now, the DOJ also says that officers were not told when use of force went too far. Matt, back to you.
All right, thank you, David. Besides Internal Affairs, the Department of Justice is also criticizing APD's lack of outside oversight. The report knocks the Citizen Police Oversight Commission, you may hear it called the POC. There is a push to allow the POC to have more of a say in the police abuse cases it investigates and more of a say in punishment for police. Mayor R.J. Berry has adamantly opposed that, saying that is the chief's job and only the chief's job.
The DOJ mentioned specifically that the Police Oversight Commission have the data that it needs to be able to make decisions, to be able to be more proactive.
The mayor is the one who names the independent review officer who decides what cases the POC, Police Oversight Commission, can even look at. The feds say that is good for protecting APD, but not good for the community. The Justice Department investigation into Albuquerque police comes down hard on the department's leadership, or rather lack of leadership. But rank and file APD officers, they are not off the hook. The APOA, Albuquerque Police Officers Union, has always been quick to defend officers' actions, and the union president still insists APD is a great department with great officers. The union's president, Officer Stephanie Lopez here, says the justice's criticism is hard to hear. The federal report says, quote, a disconnect exists between officers and residents about the perception of overly aggressive conduct by officers. We observe that many officers were dismissive of community concerns. Ms. Lopez is not specifically responding to that, but she is making this promise this morning.
And we'll do our very best to learn from any additional training that is given to us and any other recommendations that are imposed on us, to do the very best to learn from them.
The report notes that in the vast majority of shootings, a number of officers were present, and then adds officers have a duty to intervene to prevent other officers from using excessive force. The DOJ makes a point of saying most officers mean well and care, but also says APD's, quote, us against them attitude has seeped down to the rank and file. Well, we will continue to dive into this story this morning, today, and for quite some time. Stay with News 13 and KRQE.com for continuing coverage of the DOJ findings on APD, and there is a ton of information on KRQE.com.